Hey YouTube, it's Robert Hall, and in today's video I want to show you a simple method that you can use to find a desired balance between flash and ambient lighting. For the purpose of understanding the context of this video, here is the location that I was shooting at with just ambient light. It's also the reason that I can't be a natural light photographer. Everything worked well here except the natural light. No matter how you expose it, the subject simply would never stand out in this type of environment. While I was shooting a job for the university, I asked the creative director how dramatic they wanted the image, which is basically my non-photographer speak for how much brighter do you want the subject to be than the background or ambient environment that they're in. Rather than take one test shot and then show the creative director and then say, oh, you want it brighter or darker, I decided, you know what, I'm just gonna give you guys 4 options really quick. So I asked the subject to stay still, and then I rattled off 4 different shots, each one with the background 1 stop less bright than the image prior. I did this in the span of about 10 seconds, and the creative team was so impressed that it really became a theme of the shoot, and we kept on repeating this kind of approach with different subjects in different locations for the remainder of the shoot. Now, while looking at the images, you can tell that the primary difference is that the background is getting darker in every image, but the subject, at least the part being lit by flash, is staying the same brightness, which is properly exposed. Yes, the shadow on the subject's face does get darker, but I'll touch on that in a little bit. What happens here is simple and is pretty much my approach in any type of situation. First, I choose the aperture that I want for the look of my background. In this case, it was f2.8 on my 135mm G Master lens. I'm choosing this wide aperture because not only does it work well for the ambient settings, which are kind of moderate low light, but also because I want the background to be somewhat blurry. Next, I set my shutter speed to 1/250th of a second, which is my camera's maximum sync speed and what I try to shoot at whenever I'm using flash, simply because it avoids high-speed sync and it gives me maximum sharpness in my ambient settings. So unless I'm purposely trying to introduce motion blur, you can pretty much find me at 1/250th of a second. I then balanced at ISO 800, which not only worked well for the brightness of the background, at least as bright as I wanted it to be, it was also a strategic decision to give me flexibility, meaning I can roll the ISO back and change the look of the image later, which is the whole point of today's video. From there, I put my flash in a position that would give me Rembrandt lighting, which creates a Rembrandt triangle on the right side of the subject's face. So once all 3 of my camera settings are established and my flash's position and modifier selection are established, I can now find my flash output. All I'm looking for here is properly exposed skin, and I determined about 1/32nd power worked really well for that. So with all those settings, this first shot is about as bright as I would want the background to be. It's balanced and there's no clipped highlights, however, there are a lot of bright areas of the image that draw your attention away from the subject. Shot 2 is where the process of creating variety begins. After the first shot, I dropped my ISO from 800 down to 400. I then increased my flash output from 1/32nd power to 1/16th power. Both of those represent full stop changes. The ISO dropped 1 stop and the flash output increased 1 stop. This means the change in ISO and flash output cancel each other out, and the flash on the subject looks the same. However, now the ambient light on the subject and background is 1 stop darker. The subject is now way more pronounced in the image. I repeat this process again, taking my ISO 400 down to ISO 200 and increasing my flash output from 1/16th to 1/8th. Now this one is my personal preference. It is the image that I would make if nobody else was involved in the decision making, and I think that it looks the best, but I understand that my tastes are subjective, and that's the whole reason that I'm chasing variety to begin with, is to give my clients options so that they can make the decisions that work best for their brand. But in this shot, I think that the subject demands all the attention in the image, even though it's a wide space, and there's really no bright areas that are competing with the brightness of her skin tone lit by the flash. Now, since I've still got the space with my settings, I do it one more time, dropping from ISO 200 down to 100 and increasing my flash output from 1/8 up to 1/4 for this result. While I still like how much attention the subject grabs in this image, we're getting into territory that I find is too dark. For instance, the dark side of her face, I feel like it needs some fill, and I feel like she's too dark on that side to separate from the background, and she deserves a hair light on the back to be separated from that background. Now, many will ask here, why not use the shutter speed or the aperture to make these adjustments instead? Well, for aperture, I don't think it should ever be used as a means of balancing flash, despite the fact that it's so often taught that way. I'm sure many of you were told when you first learned flash photography that shutter speed controls ambient and aperture controls flash. But I think that's a terrible way to learn flash, and I don't know. Maybe I'll revisit that on another video. Aperture controls the depth of field in the image, it controls how detailed elements of the background are, and the clarity of those background elements is important to the story that you're trying to tell. To me, aperture should be used just like flash to tell the viewer what's important and what isn't, not just adjusting your flash to properly balance your image for an even exposure. Had I used aperture to control the look of these images, each image not only would have gotten darker, but the background would have gotten sharper and sharper and sharper. But if I determined that I liked how f2.8 looked the best, why would I use anything else? As for shutter speed, there simply isn't the range necessary below sync speed to maintain a shutter speed that is high enough for use with my 135mm lens. To me, on modern cameras, ISO is what you can use the most flexibly to have the least visual effect on your image despite changing the exposure values that it gives you. For my editorial work, I'll happily go up to ISO 1600, and my tolerances increase if I'm doing stuff for personal work or for weddings. Now, this approach using ISO to deliver variety amongst your images isn't always available. In bright outdoor conditions, an ISO of 800 is completely unnecessary. If you're trying to get this variety in bright outdoor conditions, I suggest instead using high-speed sync. That way the shutter speed will affect both flash and ambient lighting just like the ISO did in my example. Finally, I want to note that this same approach could be applied to using multiple flashes. I could have had a 3-light setup on my subject, a key light, a fill light, and a rim light, and as I decrease the ISO on each image, I would instead increase the flash output on all 3 of my images. That way the subject would look the same and the background would still get darker. Had I used a fill light, for instance, this would have eliminated the changing shadows on the dark side of my subject. Ultimately, I wanted to share this quick example because it shows how powerful having a flash in your toolkit is. Making quick adjustments completely changes the tone and intensity of an image, giving you way more variety than using natural light alone. I hope this video helped you out. Leave a like if it did, subscribe if you want to see more, and until next time, keep on shooting.